Well, thank you so much. I mean, we can also skip this, and I'll just show you a bunch of pictures of my foster kittens. That's an alternative presentation option we have here. So maybe afterwards, just come see me later on. So I am coming to you from Madison, Wisconsin in the United States, and this is our city flag. This is also the only image that I have for this presentation, so just to forewarn you, there's nothing else to look at. Madison is on an isthmus between two lakes and has a domed Capitol building of the state in the center. So I always thought this was such a lovely flag that is also a map at the same time. So being here is a real sort of highlight for me because I've never given a keynote address before. So this is kind of a new experience. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if I like it and if you like it. I'm also going to pace around a lot. The organizers have been kind enough to provide me with a handheld microphone because I'm a very anxious speaker, and I've also, unusually for me, recently had some caffeine. And so moving around is going to be good for me at this stage, I think. So let's dive into talking a little bit about the emotional lives of creative professionals. So I work as a freelancer. So I sit in my house, in my home office, in front of my computer and hope that at some point a client will appear in my inbox and perhaps help me make my mortgage payment for the month. And usually that works out pretty well. And I'll get some sort of email that says, "Oh, Daniel, I need you to make a map of these towns in Finland or where these birds migrate to or tornado strikes or something like that for a book or a magazine." I operate primarily as a print cartographer and doing static maps. And their description will usually be pretty brief about what they're looking for because they're hiring me as the person who knows about spatial things and what might be good to convey and how to do that. And I receive this one or two sentences from them of description, and I think about it for a little bit, and then I reply and attempt to project confidence as I say to them, well, of course, I'd be happy to work with you. I can definitely do that thing, and it's going to be great, and it's going to be on time, and all that sort of thing. Even though I feel a certain degree of dread and anxiety well up over me as soon as any client appears in my inbox, because I know I'm going to have to promise them something without having any idea how I'm going to deliver that thing. I start with nothing, and I somehow have to end up with something that is good, or at least good enough. And the challenge is one of the blank page, as I was taught in my cartography education. And this is the kind of thing that people in all kinds of creative professions deal with. You have nothing, and you have to somehow figure out how to write a paper or draw a building if you're an architect, or make dinner if you're not sure what you have in your pantry, all those kinds of things. And it's a common kind of experience. And for me, a lot of that anxiety and sometimes lack of self-confidence comes from the fact that mapping is, to my mind, a craft. And that carries very specific connotations for me. I think of myself as a craftsperson and maps as crafted objects. And this doesn't just apply to me, but it applies to all of you who make things. And to me, that word means that a crafted object somehow is imbued with or reflective of the individuality, the personality, the humanity of the person who is creating it. There is a sort of relationship between the person who is making the thing and what they make. You make things that only you can make because of your own individual skills and experiences. And that is true, I think, for any crafted object. So take, for example, a chair. You could purchase a chair that was made in a factory, furniture factory with all kinds of machines, spinning wood and all that, and running through hundreds of them a day. And just because it's made by machines doesn't mean it is necessarily inferior. It could be very comfortable, well-designed, attractive, well-priced, and all that sort of thing. But contrast that with a chair that you might buy from a furniture maker, like somebody who has handcrafted that thing, an artisan. They might spend weeks on an individual piece of furniture, carefully poring over it, sanding this and gluing that. I don't really know a lot about how furniture is made, but those are probably two of the steps. And I think it has been my observation that we value those kinds of objects much more. Not just monetarily, because of course we have to pay that craftsperson for their significant time and labor that they put into it, But more importantly, to my way of thinking, is that we value them more sentimentally. We feel the intent of the artist in making the thing. Right? We might have this chair in our house and invite people over and say, oh, I bought this from so-and-so, and I met them at the craft fair, and we had a conversation. This chair reflects them in some way, and it mediates an interaction between you and the person who made it. And to me, that is a characteristic of all crafted objects. They reflect who made them, and they are entangled with that object in some way. And that might be a chair. It might be a painting. Certainly lots of paintings gain or lose both monetary and sentimental value based on the specific person who made them. But maybe you have a scarf that was knitted for you by somebody who cares about you. And you value it not just because it keeps you warm, but because it reminds you of them and their particular taste in colors, or their skill, or sometimes lack thereof in knitting. Right? These are things that we value beyond the functional. And I think maps are the same way. If I go outside this auditorium and talk to people about it, probably most of them wouldn't think about that. They would say, oh, wait, people still make maps? I thought that went out in the Renaissance. But in a room like this, we understand this as crafters. We make these things, and we work with other people who make these things, and we're aware of maybe our colleagues' preferences, certain colors they like to use, certain areas they like to map, and styles they work in. So I think that we have a knowledge of this and an awareness, but yet in my experience of interacting with a lot of my colleagues, I don't think the crafter comes into the conversation as often as I would expect. When I think about when I talk to people online or talk to them at conferences, much of my interaction is about engaging technical knowledge. Here's how we do something in ArcPro. Here's a data set that I found. And these are useful things. As crafters, we wield tools, and the tools help us make our craft, and we can always learn new ones or to use the old ones that we have more effectively. And that's great. That's an important part of growth, and that's a large reason why people come to these kinds of conferences, to learn these new things. But the tools and the techniques are only part of the equation. The other part is the person. And we don't, I think, focus as much on that in our discussions and the way that who we are influenced the thing that we produced. It's not totally absent by any means, but given how much of an influence it has in an outsized way on our work, I think that there's room to have more of those kinds of discussions. And so that's what I want to focus on today, just to open the door towards more of those kinds of talks. And specifically, I want to think about the way that not only do we, as crafters, influence the things that we create, whether that is a map, a scarf, or dinner, but also the way that it influences us, because this is a two-way relationship. We are affected by the work that we make in the process of making it. And so I want to think about, sort of my process and my experiences and share them with you in hopes that they might resonate a bit with you. So I'm here in my office, sitting there in front of my blank page, and I'm frustrated, and I don't know what to do, but that's an anxious experience for me. For some of you, it might be exciting. There are people who say, yeah, I don't know where I'm going, and that's an adventure. I don't have any concept of the end point, but I know I will get there in some way. Do any of you have sort of emotional reactions at the start of a project sometimes? Feel dread, anxiety, happiness, excitement? Please raise your hands. Yeah, so that's probably about 2/3 of you, 3/4, plus the rest of you who raised your hands secretly in your head. This is common, and I ask you to raise your hands because it's important to know that that is common. If you take nothing else away from our time together this afternoon, understand that the feelings you have about your work are not, something that is only about you and that makes you somehow, weird or something bad about you. This is how the process goes, and this is something we all share in one degree, in one style or another. For me, the challenge is that going from nothing to something is an opaque process. There's not a set of steps that I can follow. This is not putting together a Lego set or solving an algebra equation. I can't just do thing A and thing B and thing C and then it's right. It's the thing that my client wanted. There is no right answer. There are 1,000 things that they would like from me that they would be happy with, and there are many that they would not be happy with. And each of you would respond to my client very differently because you're all unique people making things that only you can make. I saw this the other day. We did a workshop on Monday about typography, and I gave everybody the same shape files and asked them to spend some time making a map. And they all took different typographic approaches, different typefaces, labeling styles, and also different colors in their base map and things that they chose to emphasize or not. And that's a beautiful thing about any crafted object, maps included. And that's something I love to see when I go through the map gallery upstairs and see how everybody has their own way of it. But for me, sitting in front of my computer, I have to sit there figuring out, where do I go? Can I get an idea? And I have to hope that somehow, if I wait patiently long enough, an idea will just sort of appear, just pop up from the back of my mind to the front. I don't know where they come from, but something will tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, why don't you try making those circles, or making that yellow, or something like that. And the path starts to become a little bit more clear to me. But you can't summon creativity at will. That's the frustrating thing about it, and it can become uncomfortable the longer you wait when nothing is particularly going your way. It reminds me very much of a phrase, a quote from my favorite author, Ray Bradbury, who said, "Go to the edge of the cliff and jump off. Build your wings on the way down." And that takes hope. That takes a leap of faith to promise your client, your supervisor, whomever you are making this for, that you can deliver something when you have nothing to start with. And I want you all to understand that because you take those challenges on time and time again and face down the blank page and promise that you will get to the end, you are courageous people. Crafters are brave, and they have the strength to continue facing down the uncertainty and beat their own path to something that will do the job that we need. Now, there are ways to make this a little bit easier. We can get inspiration. That's what artists always try and do, get inspired. And there's a lovely metaphor for this that I heard some years ago in a talk by Oliver Uberti and James Cheshire, who have collaborated on a number of popular atlases together, including Where Animals Go and London, the Information Capital are a couple of them. And they spoke a few years ago at the NACIS conference about some of their process in creating and working together. And the thing that I took away most from that was their metaphor of keeping the well full. This idea that if I want to go and pull an idea out of my brain, if I want something to happen, I need to stock that reservoir with ideas, hopefully well in advance, so that there will be something waiting for me, floating near the top that I can take use of. And to them, keeping the well full meant, let's go spend the day at the museum. Let's take an afternoon walk in a park that we haven't been to, or go to a music festival. Just something to break out of the ordinary day-to-day experiences that we have and think in new ways, be exposed to new aesthetics and new ideas. And in many cases, coming to a conference like this is very much along those lines. And I admit that I struggle just a little bit with that, because if I'm out and about at a museum or something like that, I feel like I'm not working. Shouldn't work involve me sitting blankly in front of my computer, hoping that something good happens? But of course it doesn't. But I think to myself, I don't know, should somebody really pay me to go to the museum? But it is work. And if you're in a position where you supervise people who do any creative work, cartography or otherwise, I would highly suggest that you encourage your employees to go do those things and pay them to do so, because it will pay off in the quality of the work that they produce. These ideas will come up at some point later on and make everything go more smoothly, more effectively, and faster. There is, of course, probably many of you are thinking, one good way to get inspired about how to make good maps, and that would be go look at other people's maps. That's the most obvious one. But there is a little bit of an emotional peril to that, I think. I get envious. I'm exposed constantly to other people's maps in books and social media, map galleries like this, and I will often stop at somebody's map and say, oh, I wish I'd thought of that thing. I wish I knew how to make that thing, that particular beautiful terrain or whatever color scheme that they're doing. Right? And that stings a little bit. Do any of you get professional envy of your colleagues? Please raise your hands again. All right, that's good. That's most of you. And it's important to understand, again, this is very common. We are often looking at other people's work and realizing that maybe there's a gap between what we would like to do and what we can do. And this is something I've struggled with for many years. But I have, over time, learned some ways that take that envy, and instead of feeling a negative self-image, saying, oh, I'll not be as good as that person ever, I'm not good enough, why aren't my clients hiring them, turn that instead to an opportunity for growth. I learned an important lesson along this path from a colleague of mine many years ago named Marty Elmer, who was briefly in the cartography world. He isn't anymore, so many of you might not have ever encountered him. But before Marty came to cartography, he was a skilled illustrator. He did sort of cartoonish, vector-looking artwork that was featured on posters and games and T-shirts and things like that. And sometimes people would look at his work and say, "Marty, you're so talented, that's lovely work." But he found that particular word, talent, to be a little bit annoying to him when people said that, because as he would explain it to me, when people called him talented, the way they spoke about it suggested that there was something innate about him. "Marty, you can make this thing because you were born with something that most other people don't have." And to his mind, he would rather they understand that he was able to do that work because he was skilled, which to his mind was a little bit of a different word. And you might use these words differently than Marty did, but the distinction is important about something that is innate versus Marty spending thousands and thousands of hours drawing over and over again, learning from others, copying their styles, dealing with the frustration of it not working, to finally get to the point that he was able to do those things that people liked. And he wanted people to recognize that if they were going to praise him and to understand that it was not easy to get to that point. And that was an important lesson for me. And again, it's not necessarily about the terminology, but how it's being used. To think about when I see somebody's work, to understand that they're not magic. They didn't just start in the top left corner of the page and start painting downward, making something out of absolutely nothing, pixel by pixel. Right? They gained certain skills, and I gained different skills. We spent our time focusing on different things. And I could potentially learn those skills that they have if I would like to devote a lot of time towards that. And that's a very important thing to realize, that there is nothing innately inferior about you if you can't do that thing that person does. You're not incapable of learning. There is an argument to be made, I think, about perhaps people do have innate inclinations toward one kind of thing or another. But while we might start at different places on this continuum of skill, the process by which we advance is largely similar. You were not born with the ability to make maps. You learned that from tutorials or textbooks, classes, however it happened to come to you. And I know many of you have very different backgrounds of how you came to this. But you have the ability to learn skills and to learn new things. And again, that's why you're at conferences like this, is to pick those up. So, if I get envious of somebody's map, I might go up to it and I might say, well, let me break it down. Let me think about the layers it's made of. Most of us have pretty similar workflows. Our maps are built out of layers. We open GIS and we throw in some shapefiles and do some analysis and styling and start over because we didn't save recently and it crashed. Right? All of those kinds of things. They just happen to use different tools. And I don't probably have to look very carefully at their map to figure out how to do it because they'll probably just tell me. Think of all the presentations at conferences like this one where people are talking to you about how they did the thing. They want you to know how they did that. And that is something I treasure about the cartographic community. We are very non-proprietary with our knowledge in a way that is not unique but is uncommon. So many times in my life over the years, I've showed friends and family what I'm working on, and I've talked about how I think it's interesting and what I've been able to figure out on my own. And they'll say, well, that's a great new technique you have. Are you going to copyright that or patent it or protect it somehow? I'd say, no, that's not what we do. We share it. And that's usually the first thing you do. And in fact, most of the time, people can't stop you from doing that. There are plenty of people who will tell you all kinds of stuff, whether you wanted to hear it or not. And so that's something that is worth celebrating about the kind of people that we are as creatives. And so the opportunities are there for most of us to gain these kinds of skills. I say most because it is important to recognize you might like somebody's work and not have had, and maybe will not have, the same kinds of opportunities that they do. Maybe they're using some software that costs money and you're not in a position to be able to use that software. Maybe they have more time than you because, again, this is the kind of thing that can take many hours of experience. We have competing factors in our life. But it's important to recognize that these are external things placed upon you, that it is not that you are incapable intrinsically of achieving what they did. It's just that your life is on a different path than them. And that is a very different thing. That stings less. It might be frustrating to realize, I probably just won't have time to do that. But it certainly stings much less than saying, I could never be that person, because that's not true. You're capable of learning and growing your skills, as you have your whole life. And confronting that, again, takes some vulnerability. It takes some courage to say, I'm not where I want to be, to look at other people's work and be willing to confront that gap and decide I'm willing to dive in and put in the time. I have the strength to put in the hours to try and go through it not quite working until I finally get to where I want to be with those skills. So again, I hope you will think of yourselves in this way, as strong and courageous people, because you are willing to take on the process of crafting and being a creative. But we were in the midst of a little narrative about me sitting at my computer with a little bit of a blank page problem. So let's say I have gotten a little bit of inspiration from other people's maps. Now that's starting to give me some ideas. My well is full of good things, and it starts to point me in the right direction of where I want to go. But this is not a straightforward path to go from nothing to something. It's not, do thing A, do thing B, and so on. It is meandering, and there are many dead ends, and there are times when, I deleted that thing, maybe I should have not done that, I liked what I did before. It's always interesting to ask people how long they think it took you to make the final product, because you usually only get credit for how good that is and taking the shortest path from nothing to that. But we need a credit too for all of the things that didn't work. So I often, when I post my work, I also say, also, here's the things that didn't work. I want you to recognize that I didn't just magically appear there. It is also a meandering process, but also a sometimes emotional roller coaster, because we are constantly evaluating our own work as we make it. And it is one thing to walk into an art museum and say, I like that piece of art, or that one is not to my taste, I'd rather not look at it anymore. But it is another thing to think that about your own work, things that you made. And so I can be in front of my computer and it's not fitting together, and I think, I don't like this, and I made it, so what does that say about me? And again, the self-doubt creeps in about, should I be doing this? How did I get to this point? Maybe I should take up another profession. I don't know. Probably something, maybe I'll go to that furniture factory and run the machine. I don't know. Something like that. And there are also ups to this emotional roller coaster. There are joys. Maybe I get that idea and it starts to come together and it looks good and I know I made that good thing. And that is a feeling of satisfaction and pride and power to know that I can summon something out of a blank page. And that is a feeling that is incomparable to anything I've ever experienced in my life. There is not much that comes close, and there is nothing that is quite the same. And it can be addictive, I would think. I have some struggles with this, and that'd be something I'd be curious to talk to all of you about. Maybe in the hallways or through the rest of the conference, whether you struggle with that too, because I've reached the top of the mountain and I've triumphed, and then it starts to fade away and there's an emptiness. There's a feeling like, where's the next one I should climb, because I got to get that back. And so that's something I'm working on. And so that's why I bring that up, because I think we need to talk more about these emotional technologies, not just the tools and techniques that we put into our work, but how we grapple with these feelings. And, sharing them, again, takes courage, it takes vulnerability, but it's something that you have as creatives. You are willing to face down the blank page. You can also be willing to deal with the gap between where you're at and where you want to be, and maybe also share your feelings along the way. Because there are not a lot of places that we can do that. There are not a lot of people in the world who would understand why I might be frustrated by my project not working out. There are not a lot of people I could go to and talk about the joy of a finely tuned choropleth color scheme, right? Even other creatives might not be too into the weeds of cartography to get into that sort of thing. And that's why I want people to share, because this is the audience you can do that with. Some years ago, I worked with my friend and colleague at Esri, John Nelson, to create a website for this sort of sharing called A Cartographer's Story. Have any of you heard of this story, this website? Please raise your hands. I'm just curious. All right. So it's a few of you. And again, it's sort of a small, minor thing, but that's actually probably more people than I might have expected. So if you want to visit acartographersstory.com, it's just a place where people share their narratives about their feelings of how their work influenced them. There are stories about people gaining self-confidence, bonding with loved ones, overcoming grief through the process of doing the work. So it's definitely something that I think is worth sharing and having some future conversations about. So in my little narrative here about making my map, I've wandered through these creative wilds, we'll say, and I have beaten a path to some sort of map-like object, right? Something that is maybe good, maybe just good enough, and it's been emotionally laborious. Map making is not very physically laborious, even though some people have emailed me and seem to think so. They'll say, oh, I want to hear about all the places you explore. It's like I'm leading Arctic expeditions or something like that. I don't know. But it can be emotionally laborious as part of that. So have any of you felt drained by a project, its joys, its frustrations at any point? Yeah, see, again, this is normal. And you're not alone in this. But eventually you will reach the end of that project. And now comes the time for one of the hardest things, which is sharing it with other people. I have to show my work to my clients because they're paying me for it, and so they're going to want to know if I did things in the way that they like. And some of you have supervisors that you have to turn things over to. And some of you are just putting your work generally out there on the internet. And that takes an incredible amount of strength for a lot of us. So again, understand that you are creative, brave and creative individuals to be able to do that. Because you might be very proud of something and you've triumphed and reached that end goal, and then sometimes maybe other people are not so into it, what you've done. That stings a lot too. But feedback is necessary to doing good work. This is something we talked about yesterday in the map critique workshop that several of you were at. And I appreciate all of the strength and vulnerability that I saw on display there of people willing to put their work up for discussion, especially because some of it was in a very unfinished state, and that's often even harder. I can talk a lot about critique, but that's something that could probably be another couple of hours of discussion. So I want to summarize a couple of things that are just sort of key points about that. The first is that my general mantra about things is to critique with empathy. Understand, again, that there is this relationship between the person who made the thing and the thing that only they could make. And you might be sitting there, looking at a map that somebody made and thinking about, does this line style work for me? Are the colors right? Did it get printed properly? Details about its functionality. Very important details about functionality and whether or not it's going to do what it needs to do. But there is no way that you can pull on the thread, that you can make comments about it without pulling on the threads that connect it to the person who created it in one way or another. It might not be a lot and could be entirely accidental, but you will have an effect on them because they are inseparable. And that doesn't have to go, towards something negative. We often think of critique as, you should change this and you should do that better or whatever. But that's also positive things too. If you like something, you become, and you say nice things about it, you become rapidly aware of that person's level of investment in the work. Not just emotionally, but certainly even if it's not something particularly creative, their time is worth a great deal, and so they feel that sort of investment in the work as well as their humanity. So it behooves us, if we're going to give feedback to other people, to think about that, because if I want somebody to listen to my advice, I need to make sure that they are receptive to it and that I present it in a way that makes them feel safe and feel comfortable with that vulnerability so that they listen. And the particulars will vary a lot by individual situation, so I can't say very specifically about some steps that you ought to follow, but I will say that if you critique with empathy and an understanding of this connection and that other person's mind state, that your critique will go farther and people will be more receptive to it. And on the flip side, if you are receiving critique, it's very valuable to stop and think a little bit about what is your reaction to that. I get defensive sometimes. just automatically, without even thinking about it, someone will say, well, change these 2 or 3 things, and my brain just unconsciously starts listing reasons to me why I shouldn't have to do that. And that might be because I'm very proud of the particular thing that I made, but it could also simply be because I'm tired. I have reached the top of this mountain, and then somebody has come by and said, well, the actual technical peak is another couple hundred meters over there, and you have to keep going. And I think, I don't want to do that. I need to be done. I have other things to do. So can we get out of this minimally? But that makes me less receptive to feedback. And so I have taken the time to try and be, self-analytical about, well, what am I doing here and how can I make this better for me? So now I read emails for feedback from clients and I quickly sort of synopsize it in my mind, and then I go away. I do something else, work on another project, have dinner, whatever it is. I put some distance between me and that critique to let it just digest in my mind until I finally feel more comfortable and ready to actually take on, again, the hard work of making things better the way that the client wanted. And maybe you have your own strategies, but maybe you haven't thought about these things as much. I did not for quite a long time. And this is, again, a reason that I think that we should share more of these emotional strategies, not just our technical ones for how to get our work done. They both have a place in growing us as professionals and growing us as craftspeople. All of this is advice that I wish that I had presented more to students when I used to teach classes. That's sort of how I've approached the talk in general here. I would give lectures in introductory cartography in Madison for many years, and I would teach about projections and typography and colors and all these things, but I sort of wish I had had a day that we just talk about these kinds of things and what does it feel like to make things. Because while it might be valuable for people at any level to discuss, I think it's particularly valuable for people who are just starting out and don't necessarily expect that this is what it's going to be like. They're sitting there trying to make something, and maybe they're getting frustrated, and they wonder, well, all my other colleagues seem to have their emotions together, and they seem calm. I see these nice posts on social media, and everything is going great. Or they get excited about what they've done, and they're proud, but they think, are my friends going to think I'm weird for getting really excited about this projection or something like that? They don't see that modeled perhaps as much as they could, to know that this is okay to share and that there are people who will understand and people who can help and commiserate or share your joy. And I think that's important to model for everybody at all levels, but certainly for those who haven't experienced that as much. So that's my approach to thinking about this now. Some years ago, I was a fellow at the University of Wisconsin Cartography Lab. This is different from my teaching there. I was also in the lab working to help mentor students who were working on practical cartographic projects. They would make maps for clients and kind of get that hands-on experience that people would come from the history department or whatever and say, please make a map for my book. And I would share technical details with them. Here's how to click this button and get this color scheme changed the way you want. Hands-on practical things. And they would write me notes of gratitude sometimes, and I would put them on my computer there. And I would look at them when I felt bad about my own work and it wasn't going well. And then one day I put the most important note of all of them on that computer, and it is one that I wrote to myself. And it said, I made my own path. And to me, that is an encapsulation of what it is like to be a creative professional, to be a crafter. We have to fight our own way through the wilderness to reach our destination, and only we know the destination, and half the time we don't know what it is until we get there. We have to make our own path. And it is, in some ways, a solo kind of thing, or sometimes a small group of people who are working on a map. But that doesn't mean that we're entirely alone. Those paths that we're making by ourselves are next to paths that our colleagues are making. And there is a lot to be gained by peeking over the hedge and seeing what they're working on too, and the way that they're navigating their path, both in the technical details and in the emotional ones. So this talk is an appeal for you all to think about how to integrate that more into your own discussion. That doesn't need to be a talk just about how you feel. I don't know who'd do that sort of thing. It's kind of self-indulgent, but if you're up there talking about a project that you worked on and a map that you made, maybe share some of those frustrations and share some of those joys to people who would understand them and know that is part of the process, that you didn't just present your map fully assembled, everything went great, this is the shortest set of steps from A to B to get there. That's useful for other people who want to replicate your work, but I certainly recognize that I could learn a lot from all of you about how to also manage the ups and downs of the process. So this also applies to making talks, as I've begun to realize during the process of preparing this talk. I, again, haven't given a keynote before, and so I've had to think a lot about, muddling my way through to get to something that's good. And I practice this thing a lot along the way, every day, and it always came out around 45 minutes, and we're at 35 minutes now, and I've run out of things to say, so we're going to take some questions. Or you can all go, whatever.
Oh, gosh. Thank you very much for presenting. That was awesome. I mean, I, personally speaking, took away a lot of that from that stuff that I didn't realize I needed to hear. So, again, really appreciate it. I'll just open the floor to anyone if you'd like to ask Dan some questions.
I'm also going to add that in the process of preparing this, I said things to myself that I did not know I needed to hear. So,
sorry, question.
Thanks. Daniel, what you say helps all of our personal growth as people as well as professional cartographers. But partway through, I had the thought, you were talking about looking at what other people have done. But we always do better than other people in the end. We can look at other people's mistakes, their colour schemes, colour balance, balance of all the elements. So we do learn from each other, which is why we're here. And I think we are our own worst critics.
yes.
And we
So
should
please
remain
raise your
so.
hand if you agree with that statement. Okay, see, yeah, everybody agrees with that one, definitely.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
I think that this comes out in the workshop that I did yesterday on map critique, and I should also mention thank you to everybody who came to those workshops. I did one on typography on Monday for all day, and then critique the second one, and it was people sharing their work, and some of it was saying, oh, actually no, the thing you did there is fine. You're being too hard on yourself, and sure, maybe it's not where you want to be. There are other things that we could adjust, but don't be too hard on yourself. Understand that your learning is a lifelong process. There is more to do in this field or any other creative field than I could fit in a single lifetime. I could just, go to lectures all day and not run out of materials to learn and to think about and to practice. So don't be hard on yourself for being a learner and for reflecting back on your inexperience and saying, why did I do it that way? Well, because you didn't know, and that's fine, and you would be kind to somebody else in that situation, so do it to yourself. Yeah.
Got anyone else who'd like to?
Thanks, Josh. First of all, I just want to thank you for all of that, and my personal thanks to you. The cartographer story was really important in me writing my PhD, and the Blender tutorial you shared, so the spirit of sharing, props to you for that. Very thankful. And I'm really happy how we got connected through social media, and hope we can hang out some more. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about your experience online, like building those relationships, making new friends, and how it evolved over the years. And now you're not on X or /Twitter anymore.
Yeah.
How is it like? Thank you.
It's a good question, and I will say also, the reason that I've given things to the community is because it has given so much back to me. This ethos that I see there of sharing is something that I benefit from at all times in my career in different ways, sometimes very unexpectedly, but it's something that we all contribute to. I mean, think about all of us volunteering our time to go to talk here, right? That itself is a big contribution that you're making, taking time off work or whatever, vacation, to travel to a new place and go through the labor that might involve, to both learn and to share. Social media has been a big part of that for me. I was on Twitter for 10 years or something like that. My advisor suggested, this is a cool place where cartographers hang out and swap stories and things like that. And many times I saw somebody doing something interesting and I saw a thread explaining how it was done, and I would do likewise. And I have missed that to a degree because now I'm on Mastodon, and it's a smaller community. And I hope it will continue to grow, but there are positives to leaving social media, which I think we can all agree with, or though I've talked to also some of you who don't use it at all, and you sound like such mentally healthy people. I probably do not pick up as many things at the frequency that I used to. I do check in sometimes on Twitter, but I'm also hoping that alternatives arise. When I think about when I started, around, I got my master's degree in 2010, and around that time, a lot of people had blogs about cartography rather than microblogs like Twitter, social media. And so we would share things in those posts, and I think some of those networks are starting to reemerge. I'm also on things like a Slack group for the spatial community, and it's actually called thespatialcommunity.org if you want to join in there. So I think there are alternatives that are starting to fill the gap, and I think that will pick up a little bit more as time goes on. But it is, that makes these kind of communities that we're forming here in the moment in conferences in person all the more important to do, to keep them going, because there is a magic that happens here that can't happen really as easily online. We can have more of a dialogue. We can sit down and grab a laptop and say, let me quick show you this kind of thing, and everybody gather around. And that's something you don't find anywhere else. So I've been glad to be able to join a new community by coming to GeoCart'. You should always say nice things about your host, I've learned in a keynote. Say nice things about